The white walls of the medical room seemed to close in around Commander Vexel as he sat in the uncomfortable metal chair. His forearms twitched nervously while his 6 eyes darted from corner to corner, never staying in one place for too long. The scars across his chitinous shell caught the harsh light, telling stories of battles he wished he could forget. Dr. Kethmera entered the room carrying a small recording device and a thick file. Deep blue color that showed he had never seen combat. He moved with the confident steps of someone who had never faced death on a battlefield. "Thank you for coming, Commander," Dr. Kethmera said as he settled into his chair across from the veteran. "I know these sessions are not easy for you." Vextel's mandibles clicked together in what humans might call a bitter laugh. "Easy, Doctor. Nothing has been easy since the war ended 3 years ago. Nothing." The doctor activated his recording device with a soft beep. "The High Command wants to understand what happened to our soldiers during the Human-Zephyrian War. Your experiences could help other veterans who are struggling with similar problems. You want to know what happened to us?" Vextel's voice carried a tremor that had nothing to do with age. "We met something we were not prepared for. Something that changed everything we thought we knew about war." Dr. Kethmera made a note on his pad. "Tell me about your first encounter with human forces. Start from the beginning." Vexel's eyes focused on something far beyond the room's walls. "The beginning. Yes, I remember the beginning very well. We were so confident then. So sure of ourselves." He shifted in his chair, his scarred shell scraping against the metal. "I was commanding officer of the 47th Shock Battalion. 3,000 of the Empire's finest warriors. We had fought the Kalari rebels, crushed the Vorthan uprising, and brought peace to a dozen worlds. We thought we were unstoppable." The doctor nodded encouragingly. "What did your briefings tell you about the humans?" Primitive Vextel said without hesitation. "That is what they called them. A young species that had barely learned to travel between stars. They had been spacefaring for less than 200 years. We had been conquering worlds for over 3,000. The intelligence. Reports said they were soft creatures with thin skin and weak bones. They breathed only one type of gas and could survive in a very narrow range of temperatures. Their weapons were simple projectile throwers and basic energy devices. Their ships were slow and clumsy compared to ours." "That sounds like a reasonable assessment based on the data," Dr. Kethmera said carefully. "Reasonable?" Vextel's voice rose slightly. "Doctor, that was our first mistake. We thought being reasonable would be enough. We thought logic and superior technology would win the war for us." The veteran stood up suddenly and began pacing around the small room. His movements were jerky and uncoordinated, like a machine with broken parts. "General Thaxmer called the humans a minor inconvenience during our final briefing. Said we would be home within 3 months, maybe 4. If they proved particularly stubborn." Dr. Kethmera watched the pacing figure with growing concern. "What changed your mind about them?" Vextel stopped moving and turned to face the doctor, all 6 of his eyes fixed on the smaller alien, with an intensity that made the room feel colder. "Jake Morrison." "Who was Jake Morrison?" "A human. A soldier. Their kind of soldier." Vexel's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "He was the commander of the defense forces at Kepler Station, a small mining colony on the edge of human space. According to our scouts, he had maybe 200 Marines under his command." The veteran returned to his chair but did not sit down. Instead, he gripped the back of it with all 4 hands. "I remember laughing when I read the intelligence report. It's 200 humans against 3,000 Zephyrians. It seemed like a joke. A cruel joke that would be over quickly." "It was not over quickly," Dr. Kethmera observed. No, it was not." Vextel's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "We expected them to surrender when they saw our ships approaching. Most species do. The smart ones calculate the odds and realize that fighting is pointless." He sat down heavily, his shell creaking with the movement. "But Morrison did not surrender. He did not even try to negotiate. When we sent the standard surrender demand, do you know what he sent back?" Dr. Kethmera shook his head. "A message in perfect Zephyrian language. He said, 'Come and take it.' That was all. 3 words that should have been meaningless. But somehow, they made my soldiers nervous." The doctor made another note. "Do you suspect it was a trap?" "Of course we did. But what kind of trap could 200 primitives set for a force like ours? We had orbital bombardment capabilities, advanced armor, energy shields, battle computers that could process 1,000 tactical scenarios per second. What could they possibly do to us? Vextel's eyes became distant again. I ordered a standard assault pattern. Drop pods would deliver the first wave directly to the colony's main structures, while gunships provided cover fire. The second wave would secure the perimeter and cut off any escape routes. Simple, efficient, proven, effective on dozens of worlds. What went wrong? Everything. The word came out like a death rattle. From the moment our pods touched the ground, everything went wrong. The communications array we thought was critical turned out to be a decoy. Dr. Kethmira leaned forward in his chair. Where were they? Underground. In the mining tunnels that ran beneath the entire colony. But they were not hiding, Doctor. They were hunting. Vextel stood up again and walked to the room's single window. Outside, the peaceful gardens of the medical facility stretched toward the horizon. But he seemed to be looking at something else entirely. The first attack came from Sergeant Amy Rodriguez. She led a team of 12 humans up through a ventilation shaft right into the middle of my command post. They killed 23 of my officers before we even knew they were there. The veteran's reflection in the window showed a broken creature, nothing like the proud warrior who had once commanded. Thousands. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that they disappeared again before we could respond. One moment they were there, killing our people with these crude chemical projectile weapons. The next moment, they were gone. How did they move so quickly? They knew the ground, Doctor. Every tunnel, every service corridor, every hidden passage. Rodriguez had been born in that colony. She had played in those tunnels as a child. We were fighting her on her home territory, and she used every advantage that gave her. Dr. Kethmira set down his writing pad. This Rodriguez sounds like an exceptional individual. Vextel turned away from the window. That is what we thought at first. We assumed she was their best fighter, their most dangerous warrior. We were wrong about that too. She was just the beginning. The recording device continued its quiet humming as the two aliens sat in silence. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the medical facility. But inside the small room, the shadows seemed to be growing darker and more threatening. Dr. Vextel said finally, I need you to understand something before we continue. What I am about to tell you in our future sessions will sound impossible. It will sound like the fantasies of a damaged mind. But every word is true. He looked directly at the doctor with all 6 eyes. Humans are not what they appear to be. They are not soft or weak or primitive. They are something far more dangerous than any species we have ever encountered. And if our people ever have to fight them again, we need to be prepared for what they are truly capable of. The session ended. With that warning hanging in the air like smoke from a distant fire, Dr. Kethmira arrived early for the second session, finding Commander Vextel already waiting in the medical room. The veteran sat motionless in his chair, staring at his 4 hands as if they belonged to someone else. The doctor noticed that Vextel had not been sleeping well. The dark patches under his 6 eyes told the story of another night filled with nightmares. Are you ready to continue, Commander? Dr. Kethmira asked as he activated the recording. Device Vextel nodded slowly. I have been thinking about Jake Morrison all night, about what he taught me, what he taught all of us. The doctor settled into his chair. Tell me about Morrison. He was not a large human by their standards. Average height, maybe 40 years old, with graying hair and scars on his face that spoke of many battles. But his eyes, Doctor, his eyes were the eyes of a predator who had learned to think like prey. Vextel's mandibles clicked as he remembered. When we finally cornered a group of his Marines, Morrison was with them. I expected him to surrender when he saw he was outnumbered 50-1. Instead, he smiled. He smiled. It's a human expression that shows their teeth. I thought it meant submission at first, but I was wrong. It meant he was exactly where he wanted to be. The veteran stood and began his nervous pacing again. Morrison had been leading us into a trap from the very beginning. Every attack, every retreat, Every moment of apparent weakness had been planned. He was not trying to win individual battles. He was trying to teach us how dangerous it was to fight humans on their home ground. Dr. Kethmera made a note. Kind of trap. The kind that kills your body and your spirit at the same time. Vextel's voice grew distant. Morrison had divided his 200 Marines into teams of 10 or 12. Each team was led by someone who knew a different part of the colony better than we knew our own ships. He stopped pacing and faced the doctor. Sergeant Tony Chen had worked in the colony's power systems for 15 years before joining their military. He knew every cable, every junction, every backup generator. While we were looking for his team above ground, he was cutting power to different sections of our operation. That sounds like standard guerrilla tactics, the doctor observed. Standard? Vextel's laugh was bitter.
Doctor, there was nothing standard about what Chen did. He did not just cut the power, he rerouted it.
Our own energy weapons began overloading. Our communication systems started broadcasting human music instead of tactical information. Our armor's cooling systems began heating up instead of cooling down. The veteran returned to his chair, but did not sit. Chen turned our technology against us, but he did it with such skill that we did not realize what was happening until it was too late. By the time we figured out the problem, half of my soldiers were suffering from heat exhaustion, and the other half could not coordinate their attacks. Dr. Kethmera wrote quickly, "What about the other human teams?" Each one was worse than the last. Vextel gripped the back of his chair. Corporal Lisa Park was barely 20 years old. She looked like she had never hurt anyone in her life. Sweet face, small build, the kind of creature you would want to protect, not fight. His forehands tightened on the metal. Park had been studying chemistry before the war started, knew how to make explosives from cleaning supplies and fertilizer. But she did not just make bombs, Doctor. She made traps that would make a predator proud. What kind of traps? The kind that punish you for being careful. Vextel's eyes became unfocused. My soldiers were trained to check for obvious dangers. Hidden explosives, tripwires, pressure plates, standard military caution. Park used that training against us. He sat down heavily. She would place a small, obvious explosive in a doorway. My soldiers would find it, disarm it, and feel proud of their caution. And they would walk through the doorway and trigger the real explosive that was hidden in the wall behind them. The doctor looked up from his notes. It seems unnecessarily cruel. Cruel. Vextel's voice rose.
Doctor.
Cruel is what we call it when someone hurts others for pleasure. What Park did was not cruel. It was efficient. She was not trying to hurt us. She was trying to make us afraid to move, afraid to advance, afraid to do our jobs. He leaned forward in his chair, and it worked. After the third team was killed, by her traps, my soldiers started moving slower. They started checking everything twice, then 3 times. What should have been a 4-hour operation stretched into 4 days. Dr. Kethmera set down his writing pad. How did you finally capture her? Vexel's expression darkened. We did not capture her. We cornered her in a maintenance tunnel with 30 of my best soldiers. She had no weapons, no explosives left. No way to escape. She should have surrendered, but she did not. No, she looked at my soldiers, smiled that human smile, and activated a device on her belt. The entire section of the colony collapsed. 30 of my warriors died instantly. Park died with them. The room fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the recording device. Dr. Kethmera waited for the veteran to continue. That was when I began to understand, Vextel said finally. Park was not trying to escape. She was not trying to survive. She was trying to complete her mission. Her mission was to stop us from advancing, and she was willing to die to make sure it succeeded. The doctor made another note. What happened next? Morrison found us. The veteran's voice dropped to a whisper. He had been watching the whole time, waiting for the right moment. When the tunnel collapsed, he knew exactly where my remaining forces would regroup. Vextel stood up and walked to the window again. He came alone, Doctor. 1 human against 200 Zephyrian shock troops. He walked into our camp, carrying a white flag, which I learned later means he wanted to talk. He wanted to negotiate.
No.
He wanted to deliver a message. The veteran's reflection in the window looked haunted. Morrison stood in front of all. "My soldiers and spoke in perfect Zephyrian," he said. "You have seen what 2 of my Marines can do. You have lost over 300 soldiers to 12 humans. I have 186 Marines left." Dr. Kethmara felt a chill run through his shell. "What did you do?" "I ordered my soldiers to capture him. 50 warriors moved to surround 1 human." Vexel's voice became hollow. Morrison just stood there, still smiling. He said, "I would not do that if I were you. Ami Rodriguez has been watching you through her rifle scope for the last 10 minutes. Tony Chen has rigged every piece of equipment in this camp to explode on his signal. Lisa Park taught 6 other Marines how to make her special traps before she died." The veteran turned away from the window. Then he said something that still gives me nightmares. He said, "You think you are fighting a battle? You are wrong. You are being hunted. The only question is whether you are smart enough to realize it before it is too late." Did you believe him? I wanted to call his bluff. I wanted to show my soldiers that humans were not as dangerous as they seemed. Vexel sat down again, but something in Morrison's eyes stopped me. There was no fear there, Doctor. No uncertainty. He was as calm as if he were discussing the weather. The veteran looked directly at the doctor. "That is when I realized that humans do not fight the way we fight. We fight to win territory or resources or honor. Humans fight to eliminate threats. When they go to war, they do not just want to defeat their enemies. They want to make sure their enemies can never threaten anyone they care about ever again."
Doctor?
Kethmara noticed that his own hands were shaking slightly. "What happened to Morrison?" "He walked away." Vextel's voice was flat. "Just turned around and walked back into the tunnels. None of my soldiers tried to stop him. They had seen too much to believe that capturing 1 human would end their nightmare." The session ended with both aliens sitting in uncomfortable silence, the weight of the veteran's words hanging between them like a dark cloud. The 3rd session began differently. Commander Vextel was already agitated when Dr. Kethmara entered the room. The veteran's forearms twitched constantly, and his 6 eyes darted around the room as if looking for hidden enemies. "Bad night again?" the doctor asked as he set up his recording equipment. "They never stop, Doctor. The dreams, the sounds, the music." Vexel's voice carried a tremor that seemed to come from deep within his shell. "Do you know what human music sounds like when it echoes through empty corridors at 3 in the morning?" Dr. Kethmara activated the recording device. "Tell me about the music. It was Captain Ryan Murphy who taught us about psychological warfare." Vextel began pacing immediately, unable to sit still. After Morrison, the High Command decided that Kepler Station was just one bad commander, making mistakes. They gave me reinforcements and sent us to New Terra Prime. The veteran's mandibles clicked rapidly. New Terra Prime was supposed to be easy. Civilian colony with over 50,000 humans, mostly families and workers. No military base, no defense systems. Just ordinary people trying to live their lives. But it was not easy, the doctor observed. Murphy made sure of that. Vexel stopped pacing and gripped the window frame with all 4 hands. He was not like Morrison. Morrison was a soldier who thought like a hunter. Murphy was something else. He was a teacher who had learned to think like a soldier. Dr. Kethmara looked up from his notes. A teacher. Before the war, Murphy taught military history at one of their universities. He had studied every battle, every strategy, every victory, and defeat in human history. But more than that, he understood how to make ordinary people into warriors. The veteran turned away from the window. "When we arrived at New Terra Prime, we expected the civilians to flee or surrender. Instead, they had turned their entire city into a weapon. Every building, every street, every park had become part of Murphy's plan. How is that possible? Organization, Doctor. Perfect, terrifying organization." Vextel sat down, but immediately stood up again. Murphy had divided the city into sections. Each section was controlled by someone who knew it better than anyone else. But these were not soldiers. They were teachers, mechanics, shopkeepers, parents. The veteran began his pacing again. Kate Johnson was a school teacher. She taught children between the ages of 6 and 12. Sweet woman, probably never hurt anyone in her life. Murphy put her in charge of communications for the entire city. Dr. Kethmera wrote quickly. How could a teacher handle military communications? She did not handle military communications. She handled children. Bexthel's voice grew darker. Johnson organized the children into a network of messengers and watchers. Kids playing in parks would spot our patrols and run to tell other kids. Children walking to school would count our soldiers in vehicles, even babies being pushed in. Strollers by their parents were part of the system. The doctor stopped writing. They used children as spies. Not spies, doctor, just children being children. But Johnson had taught them a game. Simple game where they would remember numbers and repeat them to their friends. Our patrol sizes, our equipment counts, our movement patterns, all of it became part of a children's game. Vextel sat down heavily. By the end of the first week, Johnson knew more about our forces than our own commanders did. She knew which units were tired, which equipment was breaking down, which soldiers were getting sick, all from children playing games. What about the other sections? Danny Torres ran the transportation network. He was a mechanic who repaired civilian vehicles before the war. Murphy put him in charge of mobility for the entire resistance. The veteran's eyes became distant. Torres took ordinary family cars and delivery trucks and turned them into weapons. Not weapons that shoot, doctor, weapons that move. He created a system where any vehicle in the city could become a transport for resistance fighters, a mobile communication station, or a supply delivery system. Dr. Kethmera looked confused. How is that dangerous? Because we could never tell which vehicles were innocent and which were threats. Vextel's voice rose slightly. A mother driving her. Children to school might be carrying explosives in her trunk. A delivery truck bringing food to a market might be full of armed fighters. An old man driving to visit his doctor might be coordinating attacks through his car's radio. The veteran stood up and resumed pacing. Torres made every vehicle in the city into a potential enemy. We could not stop them all without stopping everyone. And stopping everyone meant turning 50,000 civilians against us. Did you try to stop the vehicles? Of course we did. We set up checkpoints, searched cars, questioned drivers. But Torres had planned for that too. Vextel's mandibles clicked in what might have been admiration. Every delay we caused to innocent. Civilians made the population more angry with us. Every search that found nothing made us look foolish. Every checkpoint that stopped a real resistance operation was already abandoned by the time we got there. Dr. Kethmera set down his writing pad. How did they coordinate so well? Ellen Burke. The name came out like a curse. 73. Years old, retired nurse, grandmother of 12. She spent her days knitting blankets and baking cookies for her neighbors. Murphy put her in charge of supply and manufacturing. The veteran stopped pacing and faced the doctor. Burke turned every home in the city into a small factory. Grandmothers were making explosives in their kitchens. Teenagers were assembling communication devices in their bedrooms. Retired workers were building weapons in their garages. Seems impossible to coordinate, not for Burke. She had been a nurse for 50 years. She knew how to organize people, how to manage supplies, how to make sure everyone had what they needed when they needed it. Vexel's voice dropped to a whisper. She ran the resistance supply network like a hospital emergency room. Efficient, quiet, and absolutely deadly. The veteran returned to his chair. But the worst part was not the weapons, or the organization, or the coordination. The worst part was the music. Dr. Kethmera leaned forward. Tell me about the music. Murphy had studied the psychological effects of sound in warfare. He knew that certain types of music could affect morale, could make soldiers feel confident, or afraid, or confused. Vextel's hands began to shake. He chose something called classical music. Complex, emotional, powerful sounds that humans had been creating for centuries. How did they use it as a weapon? They played it everywhere. From hidden speakers in buildings, from vehicles driving through the streets, from handheld devices carried by resistance fighters. The veteran's voice became hollow. The music would start softly, just barely audible. Then it would grow louder and more complex as our patrols moved through the city. Vexthal stood up and walked to the window again. There was one piece they played most often, something called Ride of the Valkyries. Dramatic, overwhelming, like the sound of gods preparing for battle. They would play it right before they attacked us. Why was it so effective? Because it made us feel small, Dr. Zephyrian. Military music is simple, rhythmic, designed to help soldiers march in formation. But this human music was something else entirely. It made us feel like we were not just fighting an enemy, we were fighting an entire civilization. The veteran's reflection in the window looked broken. Murphy had one of his sergeants, Chris Nelson, coordinate the psychological warfare operations. Nelson was a musician before the war, but Murphy taught him how to use music as a weapon. What did Nelson do? He studied our reactions. He learned which sounds made us nervous, which rhythms disrupted our coordination, which melodies made us think about home instead of fighting. Vexthal turned away from the window. Nelson could play music that made my soldiers homesick, or angry, or afraid, or confused. He could change our emotional state just by changing the song. Dr. Kethmora made notes quickly. How long did this continue? 6 months. 6 months of fighting an entire city that had become a single, coordinated weapon. Every civilian was a potential threat. Every building was a potential trap. Every street corner could hide an ambush. Veterans sat down one final time. But the most terrifying thing was not what they did to us, Doctor. It was how quickly they learned to do it better. Maria Santos was their intelligence officer, a young woman who had studied alien languages as a hobby before the war. What did Santos do? She learned our language in 3 weeks. Not just the words, but the concepts, the cultural meanings, the subtle implications. Vexthal's voice became barely audible. Santos began intercepting our communications and sending false orders to our units. She would make us think attacks were coming from the wrong directions, that reinforcements were arriving when they were, not that retreat orders had been given when they had not. The session ended with Vexthal staring at his hands again, as if trying to understand how beings with such simple tools had defeated the most advanced military force in the galaxy. Dr. Kethmora entered the room to find Commander Vexthal curled up in his chair. All 4 arms wrapped around his shell like he was trying to protect himself from invisible attackers. The veteran had not slept for 3 days. His 6 eyes were red and swollen, and his mandibles moved constantly, as if he were having a conversation with someone who was not there. "Commander, are you ready to continue?" the doctor asked gently. Vexthal looked up slowly. "Ready, Doctor? I will never be ready to talk about what happened at the medical facility, but I must tell someone. I must warn them about what humans become when you push them too far." The recording device activated with its familiar beep. The veteran flinched at the sound. "Tell me what happened," Dr. Kethmora said. "After 6 months at New Terra Prime, I was desperate. My soldiers were breaking down. The music, the constant attacks, the feeling that every civilian wanted to kill us. I needed to do something to show Murphy that we were still in control." Vexthal's voice was barely above a whisper. The doctor waited patiently. "I ordered the capture of human prisoners, not soldiers. Doctor, civilians, medical workers who were treating wounded resistance fighters. I thought if we removed their healers, the resistance would lose hope." The veteran's hands began to shake. "I was wrong about everything." Vexthal stood up but did not pace. Instead, he pressed his back against the wall as if something might attack him from behind. "We captured 12 humans from a small medical clinic. Doctors, nurses, people whose only crime was helping the wounded. I thought they would be grateful to be treated well as prisoners. Were they not grateful? They were terrified, but not for themselves. They kept asking about their patients, about wounded people who would die without treatment, even as prisoners. They only cared about helping others." The veteran's voice cracked. "I should have listened to their concern. I should have understood what it meant." Dr. Kethmora made a note. "It meant that these humans would do anything to protect the people they cared about. Anything at all." Vexthal slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. Among the prisoners was a human named Alex Hayes. Corporal Alex Hayes, though. He was not wearing a uniform when we captured him. The veteran's eyes became unfocused. Hayes was 26 years old, married with a baby daughter. He had been a teacher before the war, like Murphy. But Hayes taught children with special needs, children who could not learn the same way as other children. Why was he at the medical facility? His wife, Linda Hayes, was a doctor there. She was treating wounded civilians and resistance fighters. Hayes helped her by carrying supplies, moving patients, doing whatever needed to be done. Mandibles clicked rapidly. He was not a soldier, doctor. He was just a man trying to help his wife save lives. The veteran pulled his knees up to his chest. I decided to make an example. I thought if I executed some of the prisoners in front of the others, the survivors would break down and give us information about Murphy's plans. Dr. Kethmara felt a chill run through his shell. You executed prisoners? I ordered it. Humans, chosen at random, medical workers who had never held weapons, never fought against us. I had them brought to the center of our camp where all the other prisoners could see. Vexel's voice became hollow. I wanted to show them that their resistance was hopeless. The room fell silent except for the humming of the recording device. Hayes was watching. His hands were tied behind his back, but his eyes never left the execution site. When the first prisoner was killed, Hayes did not cry or beg or try to look away. He just watched. The veteran's voice dropped to barely audible. When the second prisoner was killed, something changed in Hayes' face, something I had never seen before. What changed? His fear disappeared. Completely. He stopped looking like a frightened civilian and started looking like something else. Entirely, Vextel's entire body began to tremble. When they killed the third prisoner, Hayes smiled. Dr. Kethmara stopped writing. He smiled. Not the human smile that shows happiness. This was different. This was the smile of a predator that had just decided to stop pretending to be prey. The veteran's voice became a whisper. Hayes looked directly at me and said, "Thank you for showing me who you really are." Vextel stood up suddenly, his movements jerky and uncontrolled. Then Hayes broke his restraints. French thick metal cables designed to hold creatures twice his size. He snapped them like they were made of paper. That seems impossible. I thought so too. But Hayes was not finished. He killed the guard next to him with his bare hands. Then the guard next to that one. Then the guard next to that one. The veteran's voice rose in pitch. 50 armed Zephyrian soldiers surrounded one unarmed human, and Hayes began hunting them.
Doctor.
Kethmara set down his writing pad. What do you mean hunting? It was not fighting randomly or desperately. Hayes was thinking, planning, using strategy, even while he was killing. Vextel began pacing frantically. He would grab a soldier's weapon and use it for exactly 3 shots. Then he would drop it and take a different weapon from another soldier. He never kept the same weapon long enough for us to predict his next move. The veteran stopped pacing abruptly. But that was not the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part was that the other human prisoners began changing too. Changing how? Dr. Susan Wright had been crying when the execution started. She was a gentle woman who spent her life healing people. But when Hayes began his attack, Wright stopped crying and started giving orders. Vextel's mandibles clicked rapidly. She organized the other prisoners into a fighting unit. In seconds, these medical workers became a coordinated military force in seconds. The veteran sat down heavily in his chair. Wright had never been a soldier, but she understood strategy like she had been born to it. She sent Hayes to attack our communications equipment while she led the other prisoners against our weapons storage. Paul Rodriguez, who had been a maintenance worker, suddenly knew exactly which systems to sabotage to disable our vehicles. Is that possible? I think humans have something sleeping inside them, something that wakes up when they are pushed beyond their limits. Vextel's voice became barely audible. Hayes was not just stronger when he broke his restraints. He was smarter, faster, more focused. Like the executions had activated something in his brain that had been waiting for the right moment. Dr. Kethmara leaned forward. What happened next? Betty Thompson happened next. She was a security guard at the medical facility, 62 years old, grandmother of 8 children. We had captured her because she refused to leave the wounded patients. The veteran's eyes became distant. Thompson had been quiet during the executions, just watching and listening. But when Hayes started his attack, she began coordinating. The escape? The veteran's hands clenched into fists. Thompson took charge of the civilian prisoners and turned them into an army. She gave orders like a general, moved like a soldier, thought like someone who had been planning military operations her entire life. Under her command, 12 medical workers and maintenance staff defeated over 200 Zephyrian shock troops. Many of your soldiers survived. 17. Out of 237 warriors, 17 survived to tell what had happened. Vextel's voice cracked completely, but Hayes was not finished. When the camp was secure, he looked at the 17 survivors and said something that still wakes me up screaming. Dr. Kethmera waited. Hayes said, "Go back to your commanders. Tell them what happens when you murder innocent people. Tell them that we have been polite so far. Tell them that if you want to see what humans are really capable of, keep pushing. Us." The veteran's entire body shook. Then he smiled again and said, "We hope you make the right choice." The session ended with both aliens sitting in stunned silence, the weight of the veteran's testimony hanging between them like a dark promise of worse things to come. This was the final session. Dr. Kethmera had received orders from the High Command to conclude his interviews with Commander Vextel immediately. The official report would state that the veteran was suffering from combat stress and that his testimony was unreliable. But the doctor knew better. He had seen the fear in the eyes of the generals who gave him those orders. Vextel sat in his usual chair, but something was different about him today. The constant trembling had stopped. 6 eyes were clear and focused. He looked like a soldier again, not a broken shell of one. "This is our last session, Commander," Dr. Kethmera said as he activated the recording device. "I know. They want me to stop talking. They want to pretend that what I have told you never happened." Vexel's voice was steady for the first time in weeks. "But I have one more story to tell you, Doctor. It's the most important story of all." The doctor nodded encouragingly. "After the incident at the medical facility, I was relieved of command. The High Command said I had made tactical errors that led to unnecessary casualties. They gave my forces to General Korthfall and sent me to oversee supply operations." The veteran's mandibles clicked once. "I was grateful for the demotion. I thought the war was over for me." Vextel stood up and walked to the window, but his movements were controlled now, purposeful. 6 months later, Admiral Patricia Cruz changed everything. Who was Admiral Cruz? The human commander of their deep space fleet. Before the war, she had been an engineer who designed mining equipment for asteroid operations. When the fighting started, the humans promoted her to Admiral because she understood how to move large objects through space efficiently. The veterans. Reflection in the window looked grim. Cruz was the one who taught us that humans do not just fight to win. They fight to make sure the threat never returns. Dr. Kethmera made notes. What did she do? She turned the Wolf 359 asteroid field into the largest weapon ever created. Vextel's voice carried a note of awe. 17 asteroids, each one the size of a small moon, all connected by a network of engines and guidance systems. Cruz spent 8 months converting mining equipment into instruments of total destruction. The veteran turned away from the window. Our intelligence reports said it was impossible. The energy requirements alone should have been beyond human capabilities. But Cruz was not just an engineer, doctor. She was an engineer who had learned to think like a general. How did she power such a system? She did not power it. She aimed it. Vexel sat down again, his posture straight and alert. Cruz had calculated the orbital mechanics perfectly. Each asteroid was positioned so that gravity would do most of the work. She just needed small course corrections to turn the entire field into a weapon that could destroy both fleets. Dr. Kethmera looked up from his notes. Both fleets. That was the point, Doctor. Cruz was not trying to win a battle. She was trying to end the war permanently. Her weapon would destroy every Zephyrian ship in the system and every human ship. As well, complete annihilation for both sides. The veteran's voice became thoughtful. When our commanders realized what Cruz had built, they demanded a meeting. They thought she was bluffing, that no species would build a weapon that would destroy their own forces along with their enemies. But she was not bluffing? No. Cruz met with our negotiators in person. She was a small woman, maybe 50 years old, with gray hair and quiet eyes. She did not look like someone who could threaten the survival of 2 entire fleets. Vextel's mandibles clicked in what might have been respect. But when she spoke, everyone listened. The veteran stood up and began pacing, but slowly and deliberately. Cruz told our commanders that humans had a saying, "If you want peace, prepare for war." She said that sometimes the only way to prevent future conflicts is to make the cost of war so high that no one is willing to pay it. What was her proposal? Mutual destruction. If the Zephyrian Empire did not agree to permanent peace terms, she would activate her weapon. Both fleets would be destroyed, but the message would be clear to every species in the galaxy attacking. Humanity means accepting total annihilation. Dr. Kethmara set down his writing pad. Did your commanders believe her? General Korthvel did not. He thought Cruz was desperate, that she was trying to bluff her way out of a losing position. He ordered the fleet to prepare for a final attack on the human positions. Vextel stopped pacing and faced the doctor. That was when Jake Morrison appeared. Morrison? I thought he was still fighting at Kepler Station. The siege of Kepler Station had ended months earlier. Morrison had been captured during the final battle, but he had been treated well as a prisoner of war. Our commanders thought he might be useful for negotiations. The veteran's expression darkened. They were wrong about that too, Vextel returned. To his chair. Morrison was brought to the meeting as a representative of human ground forces. He was supposed to work with Cruz to negotiate surrender terms. Instead, he looked at our commanders and smiled that terrible human smile. He said, Admiral Cruz has been very patient with you. She has given you multiple chances to end this war peacefully. But you seem to think that humans are weak because we prefer talking to fighting. The veteran's voice dropped to a whisper. Then Morrison said something that made every Zephyrian in the room understand how badly we had misjudged humanity. Dr. Kethmara leaned forward. Morrison said, "You think this war has shown you what humans are capable of. You are wrong. This war has shown you what humans are capable of when we are trying to be merciful. You have seen us defending our homes, protecting our families, fighting for our survival, but you have never seen us hunting." Vextel's hands clenched into fists. Morrison explained that everything we had experienced during the war, the tactics, the organization, the psychological warfare, the individual heroism, had been humans fighting defensively. We had never seen what humans could do when they decided to eliminate a threat permanently. What did he mean? He meant that Cruz's weapon was not a desperate last resort. It was a demonstration, a warning of what would happen if any species ever threatened humanity again. The veteran's voice became hollow. Morrison told our commanders that humans had been studying our technology, our tactics, our weaknesses throughout the entire war. If we forced them to activate Cruz's weapon, the knowledge would not die with the fleets. The doctor made rapid notes. What knowledge? How to build asteroid weapons? How to turn civilian populations into military assets? How to use psychological warfare to break enemy morale? How to fight a war of total annihilation? Vextel's mandibles clicked rapidly. Morrison said that if the Zephyrian Empire forced humanity to cross that line, every human colony would become a potential weapons platform. Every human civilian would become a potential military strategist. Every human ship would become a potential threat to any species that might threaten them in the future. The veteran stood up one last time and walked to the window. General Korthvel asked Morrison what humanity wanted from us. Morrison's answer was simple. We want you to go home and never come back. We want you to tell every species in the galaxy that humans prefer peace, but we are very, very good at war. Did the general agree? He had no choice. Cruz's weapon was real. Morrison's threat was real. The alternative was the complete destruction of both fleets and the certainty that humanity would become a threat to every species in the galaxy. Vexel's reflection in the window looked tired. The war ended that day, not with a great battle or a heroic sacrifice, but with the understanding that humans were willing to destroy themselves rather than allow anyone to threaten their species. Dr. Kethmara turned off the recording device. What happened to Morrison and Cruz? They went home. back to their families, their jobs, their peaceful lives. As if they had never built weapons that could destroy star systems or organize civilian populations into military forces, the veteran turned away from the window. That is what you must understand, Doctor. Humans do not want to be warriors. They want to be teachers and doctors and engineers and parents. But when you threaten what they care about, they become something else entirely. Vextel sat down in his chair for the last time. This recording will be classified. My testimony will be dismissed as the ravings of a damaged mind. But you will remember, Doctor, we will remember that humans are not weak because they prefer peace. They are terrifying because they are so good at war. The session ended with both aliens sitting in silence, the weight of the veteran's final warning settling between them, like a promise that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. Outside, the window, the peaceful gardens of the medical facility, stretched toward the horizon. But Dr. Kethmara knew he would never see them the same way again. Somewhere out there in the vast darkness of space, humanity was building a civilization, based on the principle that the best way to preserve peace was to be absolutely, unquestionably ready for war.